My name is Rachel Torres. I am 29 years old, and last Thanksgiving I walked into my parents' house in Riverside, thinking it would be just another family gathering. The dining room was filled with the warm glow of candles, the smell of roasted turkey drifting from the kitchen, and my relatives chatting over glasses of wine. For a moment, I thought maybe this year would be different. Maybe they would finally see me. But when my father stood up to give his annual toast, his eyes found mine across the crowded table. And with a voice that cut through all the laughter, he said I was the biggest disgrace to this family. The room went silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. My cousin's phone, which had been casually recording, captured every brutal second. That moment didn't just ruin Thanksgiving. It set off a chain of events that would transform everything they thought they knew about their disappointing daughter. Keep watching, because by the end of this story, you'll see how the woman they tried to shame became the one person they desperately needed. So let me take you back to that crisp November evening in Riverside, when the scent of sage and cranberries filled my childhood home. The Torres family had gathered like we did every year, crowding around the mahogany dining table that had hosted 3 generations of holiday meals. The walls were lined with framed photographs: my older brother Diego's medical school graduation, his wedding to his college sweetheart, their 2 perfect children. My younger sister Carmen's law school acceptance letter still hung in the hallway alongside her debate team trophies from high school. And then there were the empty spaces, the gaps where my achievements should have been if my parents had ever considered them worth displaying. I sat near the end of the table, a glass of red wine warming in my hands, watching the familiar dance of family hierarchy play out. Diego dominated the conversation from his seat beside Dad, discussing his surgical residency with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Carmen, home from her first semester at Stanford Law, fielded questions about her classes with the poise of someone destined for greatness. My father, Roberto Torres, looked distinguished in his charcoal sweater, his salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed, his presence commanding even here in our family dining room. As the owner of Torres and Associates Construction, he had built an empire from nothing, and he expected his children to build their own empires in equally respectable fields. My mother, Patricia, moved gracefully between the kitchen and dining room in her emerald dress, her silver jewelry catching the light, as she served homemade tamales and her famous mole. She smiled at everyone, but when her eyes passed over me, I caught that familiar flicker of disappointment she tried so hard to hide. The conversation flowed around topics I couldn't contribute to: Diego's hospital rotations, Carmen's mock trial competitions, Dad's latest commercial projects. I sipped my wine and tried to blend into the background, a skill I had perfected over the years. Then Dad cleared his throat and stood, raising his glass high. The room quieted instantly, all eyes turning to him with the reverence he commanded. His voice was warm but authoritative as he began his traditional Thanksgiving toast, thanking everyone for gathering, for being part of the Torres legacy. He spoke about Diego with pride that radiated from every word, praising his dedication to saving lives, his commitment to excellence. He turned to Carmen, his voice softening with affection as he talked about her brilliant mind, her future in law, how she would someday fight for justice. My heart hammered against my ribs as his gaze moved around the table. For just a moment, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe this year he would mention my photography. Maybe he would acknowledge that I had been supporting myself for 3 years, that my work had been featured in local galleries, that I had built something meaningful even if it wasn't what he had planned for me. But when my father stood up to give his annual toast, his eyes found mine across the crowded table, and with a voice that cut through all the laughter, he said, I was the biggest disgrace to this family. The room went silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. My cousin's phone, which had been casually recording, captured every brutal second. That moment didn't just ruin Thanksgiving, it set off a chain of events that would transform everything they thought they knew about their disappointing daughter. Keep watching because by the end of this story, you'll see how the woman they tried to shame became the one person they desperately needed. So let me take you back to that crisp November evening in Riverside, when the scent of sage and cranberries filled my childhood home. The Torres family had gathered like we did every year, crowding around the mahogany dining table that had hosted 3 generations of holiday meals. The walls were lined with framed photographs: my older brother Diego's medical school graduation, his wedding to his college sweetheart, their 2 perfect children. My younger sister Carmen's law school acceptance letter still hung in the hallway alongside her debate team trophies from high school.
I felt my hands begin to tremble, not from fear, but from the effort it took to keep my voice steady when I finally spoke. "If I'm such a disgrace," I said, my words cutting through the thick silence, "then remove me from everything. Your dinners, your plans, your life. If I bring you so much shame, then let me go completely." The collective intake of breath around the table was audible. Dad's face flushed red, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't quite believe I had spoken back. Mom's eyes filled with tears, her hand pressed against her chest. Diego leaned forward, his voice tight with discomfort. "Rachel, maybe we should all just—" "No!" I pushed back my chair and stood, my legs surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "I'm done pretending that being myself is something I need to apologize for." I looked around the table one last time, taking in the faces of people who had watched me grow up, who had seen me struggle to find my place in a family that had already decided I didn't have one. The children stared with wide eyes. The adults shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to look at me or away. My voice was calm when I spoke again, stronger than I had ever heard it before. "Enjoy your dinner." I turned and walked toward the hallway, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Behind me, voices erupted, some sharp, some pleading, but I didn't stop to separate them. I grabbed my coat from the hall closet, my hands moving with surprising steadiness. The front door felt heavier than usual as I pulled it open, the cold November air rushing at me like a slap. The porch light illuminated the steps where I had sat as a child, dreaming about the day my parents would finally understand me. Now those same steps felt like the edge of a cliff I was about to jump from. I walked to my car without looking back, even though I could see the glow of the dining room windows in my peripheral vision, could hear the muffled sounds of heated conversations spilling out into the night. My phone was already buzzing in my purse, messages flooding in from relatives who had witnessed the explosion. As I drove away from the house, where I had spent the first 18 years of my life, the place that had shaped me and sheltered me and ultimately rejected me, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to shrink myself to fit into their vision of who I should be. The streetlights blurred past my windshield as I made my way back to my small apartment across town, away from the Torres family legacy, away from the weight of their expectations. I didn't know it yet, but that drive through the quiet streets of Riverside would be the last time I felt like their disappointment. Because sometimes the moment when everything falls apart is actually the moment when everything begins. If you're loving what you're hearing, smash that subscribe button. It really keeps us going. All right, let's jump back in. The cold November air cut through my jacket as I walked away from the house, my breath forming small clouds in the darkness. Each step on the cracked sidewalk took me further from the glow of my childhood home, but closer to memories I had spent years trying to forget. The humiliation was fresh and raw, but it wasn't new. It was simply the loudest echo of a song that had been playing my entire life. I thought back to when I was 7 years old, sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor with a disposable camera that I had begged my parents to buy me. While Diego practiced piano scales in the living room and Carmen worked on her spelling homework at the kitchen table, I was capturing everything. The way afternoon light streamed through my window, the intricate patterns of frost on glass during winter mornings, the expressions on my grandmother's face when she told stories. I would use up entire rolls of film in a day, then wait anxiously for Dad to take them to be developed. When the photos came back, I would spread them across my bed like treasures, studying each one with the intensity of a scholar. Most were blurry or poorly framed. I was 7, after all. But occasionally, there would be one that took my breath away. A moment captured perfectly, a story told in a single frame. I remember running downstairs with my favorite photo, a picture of our neighbor's cat sleeping in a patch of sunlight, the golden light creating a halo around its fur. I found Dad in his office, surrounded by blueprints and construction schedules. "Look, Papa," I said, holding up my photo with pride. He glanced up from his work, took the photo in his calloused hands, and studied it for maybe 3 seconds before handing it back. "Very nice, mija. Now go help your mother set the table." That was it. No questions about how I had captured the light, no curiosity about what I saw when I looked through the viewfinder, just a polite dismissal before he returned to the work that actually mattered.
By the time I was 10, the pattern was clear. When Diego won first place in the regional science fair, Dad framed the certificate and hung it in his office. When Carmen's essay was published in the school newspaper, Mom made copies and sent them to every relative in Mexico. When I won the elementary school photography contest, capturing a stunning image of the old oak tree in our backyard during a thunderstorm, the certificate ended up tucked away in a kitchen drawer. I started keeping my photos in shoeboxes under my bed, private galleries that no one else needed to see. If my work wasn't worth displaying, then at least it could be mine alone. High school brought new challenges and deeper cuts. While Diego was being recruited by prestigious pre-med programs and Carmen was winning debate tournaments, I was spending my afternoons in the darkroom, learning to develop my own film. I had convinced the photography teacher, Mrs. Henderson, to let me use the equipment after school, and I would lose myself for hours in the magic of watching images emerge from blank paper in the chemical baths. One evening, I came home with prints still damp from the fixer, excited to show my parents a series I'd shot of the sunrise over the old train bridge downtown. The way the light had broken through the morning fog, illuminating the weathered wood and rusted metal, had felt like poetry to me. I found my parents in the living room discussing Diego's acceptance to UC San Diego's pre-med program. The acceptance letter lay spread across the coffee table like a holy relic. "Mom, Dad, look at these," I said, holding up the prints. "I shot them this morning. I think they're some of my best work." Dad barely looked up from Diego's letter. "That's nice, Rachel. Did you finish your math homework?" "But look at how the light—" "Math homework first, Mom," interrupted gently but firmly. "Art is a nice hobby, but you need to focus on your real subjects." Hobby. The word hit me like a slap. Everything I was passionate about, everything that made me feel alive, was reduced to a pastime, something to do when the important work was finished. I watched Diego bask in their pride, watched them plan his future with the same intensity I put into composing a photograph. Carmen joined us, fresh from her internship at a local law firm, and the conversation shifted to her achievements. I sat on the edge of the couch, my prints growing wrinkled in my hands, feeling like a ghost in my own family's story. That night, I hid the sunrise photos with all the others. Beautiful moments captured and dismissed, filed away where they couldn't embarrass anyone. The summer before my senior year, everything came to a head.
Diego was home from college, working part-time at Dad's construction company to gain real-world experience. Carmen had been accepted to Stanford's early admission program and was already talking about law school. The house buzzed with excitement about their bright futures. I had been accepted to the California Institute of the Arts, a prestigious photography program that I had applied to in secret. The acceptance letter had arrived with a partial scholarship offer. Not full tuition, but enough to make my dream possible if I worked part-time and took out loans. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one morning, the letter spread in front of me like evidence of my worth. My hands shook as I called my parents over, my voice trembling with excitement and hope. "I have something to tell you," I said, holding up the letter. "I got accepted to CalArts for photography. They offered me a scholarship." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, anger. "You applied to art school without asking us?" His voice was low and dangerous. "I wanted to surprise you," I said, my excitement already beginning to crumble. "It's a really good school. The program is—" "Absolutely not." Dad cut through my explanation like a blade. "Do you have any idea how much money we've spent on your education? And you want to throw it away on taking pictures?" Mom placed a hand on his arm, trying to calm him, but her expression wasn't much more encouraging. "Mija, we just want what's best for you. Photography isn't a career. It's not stable." "But I'm good at it," I said, my voice breaking. "Mrs. Henderson says I have real talent. She thinks I could—" "Your teacher is being kind, but kind words don't pay bills. You'll study business or education, something practical, end of discussion." I stared at the letter in my hands, the words blurring through my tears. This was my chance, my one opportunity to pursue what I loved, and they were crushing it, without even considering the possibility that I might succeed. "What if I paid for it myself?" I asked quietly. Dad's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "With what money? You think you can support yourself taking pictures at birthday parties?" The cruelty of his words struck deeper than any physical blow could have. He wasn't just rejecting my dreams, he was mocking them, reducing everything I cared about to the level of a child's fantasy. I folded the letter carefully and walked to my room, where I sat on my bed surrounded by shoeboxes full of images that no one else would ever see. That night, I wrote a letter declining the CalArts offer, my tears staining the paper as I sealed my fate. Instead, I enrolled at Riverside Community College for Business Administration, a compromise that satisfied my parents while slowly killing something essential inside me. I kept my camera, shooting in secret on weekends, but the joy had gone out of it. Every click of the shutter was a reminder of the path I had been forced to abandon. During those 2 years at community college, the family dynamic crystallized into its permanent form. Diego graduated summa cum laude and was accepted to medical school. Carmen was thriving at Stanford, already talking about working for a major law firm after graduation. And I was taking classes in accounting and marketing, subjects that felt as foreign to me as ancient languages. The conversations at family dinners became increasingly painful. Diego would talk about his anatomy classes and clinical rotations. Carmen would discuss constitutional law and her internship applications. When the attention turned to me, there was nothing to say. How do you brag about passing a statistics exam when your siblings are saving lives and fighting injustice? I graduated from community college with decent grades and immediately got a job at a local insurance office, filing claims and answering phones. It was stable, it was practical, and it was slowly suffocating me. I moved into a small apartment across town, telling myself that the distance from my family was just about independence, not about the growing chasm between who they wanted me to be and who I actually was. For 3 years, I lived that double life. By day, I was Rachel the insurance clerk, wearing business casual clothes and making small talk about weekend plans. By night and on weekends, I was the person I had always been, driving to remote locations with my camera, capturing the beauty that most people overlooked. I started developing my own work again, setting up a makeshift dark room in my apartment's tiny bathroom. The chemical smells and red-lit darkness became my sanctuary, the place where I could watch my vision come to life in the developer tray. Slowly, quietly, I began to share my work. I entered local photography contests under a pseudonym, won a few small awards, even sold some prints at a coffee shop downtown. But I never told my family. What was the point? They had made it clear that my art was worthless, and I had learned to guard it like a secret shame. The breaking point came 6 months before that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. I had been commissioned to photograph a local family's wedding, my first major paid gig. The photos turned out beautifully, intimate moments captured with the kind of emotional honesty that made people cry when they saw them. The bride's mother hugged me with tears in her eyes, telling me I had given them memories they would treasure forever. I was so proud, so hopeful, that I made the mistake of sharing the news at Sunday dinner. I photographed a wedding last weekend. The family loved the photos. They paid me $800. Instead of congratulation, I saw concern flash across Dad's face. "You're working weekends now?" he asked. "What about your job at the insurance company?" This was separate. Photography work. On my own time. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Rachel," Mom said carefully, "you can't abandon your career for a hobby. What if you lose your real job?" "But what if I could make this my real job?" I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "What if I could actually make a living doing something I love?" The silence was oppressive. Diego and Carmen exchanged glances. Dad set down his fork with deliberate precision. "You're 28 years old," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "It's time to stop chasing fantasies and focus on building a stable life. Marriage, family, security. Not this dream of becoming some kind of artist." The word artist came out of his mouth like profanity. That night, I drove home through the empty streets of Riverside, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Every red light gave me more time to think, more time for the anger to build. I wasn't asking them to fund my dreams or even to understand them. I was simply asking for acknowledgement that I might have value beyond their narrow definition of success. But acknowledgement, I was learning, was the one thing they would never give me. The months that followed were a slow-burning conflict. I continued taking photography jobs, building a small but steady client base. Word of mouth brought me more weddings, family portraits, even some commercial work for local businesses. I was good at it, and more importantly, I was happy when I was doing it. But at family gatherings, my work remained invisible. Diego's medical residency dominated every conversation. Carmen's job at a prestigious law firm filled my parents with pride. My growing photography business was treated like an embarrassing phase that everyone hoped I would outgrow. The pattern had been set years earlier, and nothing I could do to break it. I was the daughter who had disappointed them by not becoming a doctor or lawyer or businesswoman. I was the child who had chosen passion over practicality, art over achievement, dreams over security. And that pattern, that decades-long dismissal of everything I was and everything I loved, had led inevitably to that Thanksgiving night when my father finally said out loud what they had all been thinking for years. I was their biggest disgrace. As I walked through the cold November darkness, my phone buzzing with messages from relatives who had witnessed the explosion, I understood something with perfect clarity. This wasn't a moment of crisis. It was a moment of truth. The mask had finally slipped, and everyone could see what I had known all along. I was never going to be enough for them. Not as I was, not pursuing what I loved, not living authentically. But maybe, I thought as I reached my car and drove away from that house full of people who couldn't see me, maybe being enough for them wasn't the point anymore. Maybe it was time to find out what being enough for myself looked like. The silence in my small apartment was deafening when I finally closed the door behind me. I stood in the narrow hallway for a long moment, my back pressed against the cool wood, listening to the sound of my own breathing. The familiar smell of developer chemicals from my makeshift darkroom mixed with the lingering scent of the lavender candle I had burned earlier that week. My phone had been buzzing nonstop during the drive home, vibrating against the leather of my purse like an angry insect. Now it lay silent on my kitchen counter, the screen dark, but somehow menacing. I knew what waited inside. Messages from relatives, voicemails from my mother, probably texts from Diego trying to play peacemaker, but I couldn't bring myself to look. Not yet. I walked to my living room window and stared out at the city lights of Riverside stretching below. My apartment was on the third floor of an old brick building. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. The walls were covered with my photographs. Not the hidden shoeboxes of my childhood, but actual framed prints displayed with pride. Landscapes from my weekend drives, portraits of strangers who had become friends, moments of beauty I had captured when no one was watching. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe. But the peace didn't last long. By morning, my phone showed 37 missed calls and twice as many text messages. The family group chat that I rarely participated in was exploding with activity. Worse, someone had posted the video online. I discovered this when my neighbor knocked on my door, her face flushed with concern. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived across the hall, had always been kind to me. She would occasionally hire me to photograph her grandchildren when they visited, and she had a genuine appreciation for art that my own family lacked. "Rachel, dear," she said, wringing her hands nervously, "I saw something on the internet. That Facebook video. Is that your family?" My stomach dropped. I had forgotten about my cousin Jennifer's phone, the way she had been casually recording when Dad started his toast. In the chaos of the moment, it hadn't occurred to me that she might actually post it. I opened my laptop with trembling fingers and searched. There it was, shared in a local Riverside community group with the caption, "Family drama at Thanksgiving dinner. This girl really stood up to her dad." The video had been shared dozens of times already, the comment section filling with opinions from strangers who knew nothing about my life. Some people were supportive. Good for her for standing up for herself, and that father was way out of line. But others were harsh. Disrespectful daughter embarrasses family at Thanksgiving, and this is what's wrong with young people today. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. The most private, painful moment of my life was now entertainment for people I had never met. I felt exposed, raw, like someone had stripped away all my protective layers and left me standing naked in the town square. The shame was overwhelming, but beneath it was something else, a cold, clarifying anger. This wasn't just about one dinner or one insult. This was the culmination of 29 years of being invisible, dismissed, and diminished. And now it was public. I spent the rest of that day in a fog, ignoring my phone, avoiding social media, trying to lose myself in the darkroom chemicals and red-lit solitude of developing film. But even there, surrounded by the familiar magic of images emerging from blank paper, I couldn't escape the weight of what had happened. That evening, Diego called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe the green button. "Rachel," his voice was tired, strained, "we need to talk." "Do we?" I asked, surprised by how calm I sounded. "Mom's been crying all day. Carmen flew home from Stanford. The whole family it's chaos. And somehow that's my fault?" There was a long pause. "You embarrassed Dad in front of everyone. You know how he gets when he feels disrespected." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I embarrassed him?" "Diego, he called me the biggest disgrace to our family, in front of everyone. while someone was recording. He was just, look, you know he wants the best for you. Maybe he said it wrong, but stop. My voice was sharper than I intended. Don't you dare defend him. Don't you dare make excuses for what he did.
Another pause. Then, quietly, "What do you want me to say, Rachel? That you were right to blow up at Thanksgiving dinner? That it's okay to humiliate your parents in front of the whole family?" I stared at the ceiling of my small apartment, at the water stain that looked like a map of some foreign country. "I want you to say that what he did was wrong. I want you to acknowledge that I've been trying to earn his respect for 29 years and he's never given it to me. I want someone in this family to see me for who I actually am instead of who you all think I should be." The silence stretched between us for so long, I thought he had hung up. "Come home," he finally said. "Mom's making your favorite dinner tomorrow. We can work this out." "No." The word came out firm and clear. "I'm done pretending that if I just try harder, if I just act more grateful, if I just shrink myself small enough, maybe you'll all finally accept me. I'm done." I hung up before he could respond. The next few days blurred together in a haze of ignored calls, angry voicemails, and well-meaning but misguided advice from relatives. My Aunt Rosa showed up at my apartment with a casserole and a lecture about family loyalty. My cousin Miguel sent long text messages about forgiveness and moving forward. Everyone wanted me to be the one to apologize, to make peace, to fix what had been broken. But something fundamental had shifted in me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about how to repair my relationship with my parents. I was thinking about how to build a life where their approval didn't matter. I threw myself into work with an intensity that surprised me. The insurance office felt even more suffocating than usual, but it was steady income while I figured out my next move. During lunch breaks, I researched photography businesses in other cities, looked at portfolio websites of successful photographers, studied their pricing and marketing strategies. In the evenings, I edited photos until my eyes burned, uploading my best work to online galleries and professional networking sites. I applied to art shows, reached out to wedding planners, even cold-called local businesses about commercial photography needs. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I was eating a lonely dinner of ramen noodles when my phone rang. Unknown number, but something made me answer. "Is this Rachel Torres?" The voice was professional, confident. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is James Morrison. I'm the creative director at Westfield Marketing. I saw your portfolio online, and I have to say, your work is extraordinary." I nearly dropped the phone. Westfield Marketing was the biggest advertising agency in the region, handling campaigns for major brands throughout California. "Thank you," I managed. How did you find my work?" "Your landscape series caught my attention first. The way you capture light is remarkable. But it was your portrait work that really impressed me. You have a gift for finding the humanity in your subjects." My heart was hammering against my ribs. "What can I do for you, Mr. Morrison?" "We have a client launching a major campaign next quarter. Tourism board for Northern California. They want authentic, emotional imagery that captures the soul of the region, not just the typical postcard shots. When I saw your work, I knew you were exactly what we needed." I gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" 6 weeks of shooting, various locations from San Francisco to the Oregon border. It's a significant project. The budget is $200,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $200,000? More than I made in 3 years at the insurance office. "Mr. Morrison, I should mention that I don't have a large studio or a big team. I work mostly alone." "That's exactly why we want you. Your work has an intimacy that the big commercial photographers have lost. You see things differently." After we hung up, I sat in my tiny kitchen for a long time, staring at the contract details he had emailed me. This wasn't just a job. It was validation from someone who understood art, who valued creativity, who saw my work as more than a hobby. I thought about my father's words,
You think you can support yourself taking pictures at birthday parties? The irony was sharp and satisfying. Not birthday parties, major advertising campaigns for one of the most respected agencies on the West Coast. The next morning, I walked into the insurance office and submitted my 2 weeks' notice. My supervisor was shocked, tried to talk me out of it, offered me a small raise to stay. But I was done with small raises and safe choices and practical decisions that slowly killed my soul. For the first time in years, I called Mrs. Henderson, my old high school photography teacher. She was retired now, but when I told her about the Westfield contract, she practically screamed with excitement. "Rachel, I knew this day would come. I've been following your work online. You've become the photographer I always knew you could be." Hearing those words from someone who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself brought tears to my eyes. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm scared. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail?"
Honey, she said gently, you've already been failing. You've been failing to live up to your potential for years because you let other people's fears become your own. This isn't about whether you might fail. This is about whether you're brave enough to succeed. That night, I stood in my living room surrounded by my photographs, really seeing them for the first time in months. The way light fell across a child's face during a family portrait, the emotion captured in a bride's eyes during her first dance, the raw beauty of a sunrise over the desert that I had driven 3 hours to photograph. This wasn't a hobby. This was my calling. And for the first time since that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. The video was still circulating online. My family was still angry and confused and hurt. I was about to embark on a career that most people considered impractical and risky. But as I looked at the evidence of my talent hanging on these walls, as I thought about the opportunity that had landed in my lap, not despite my authentic work, but because of it, I realized something profound. The moment when everything falls apart is sometimes the same moment when everything begins. My father had called me a disgrace, and I had walked away. But walking away wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The first location shoot for the Westfield campaign was in Big Sur, where the Pacific Coast Highway curves along dramatic cliffs and the ocean crashes against jagged rocks below. I arrived before dawn, my car packed with camera equipment and camping gear, my hands trembling slightly as I carried my cameras down the narrow trail to the beach. This wasn't just another photography job. This was my chance to prove that betting on myself had been worth it. The insurance office felt like a lifetime ago, even though I had only left 3 weeks earlier. Now I was standing alone on a windswept beach, watching the sun rise over the mountains while waves crashed at my feet, and I was being paid handsomely to capture it all. James Morrison had given me creative freedom I had never experienced before. "Show us California the way only you can see it," he had said during our planning meeting. "We don't want stock photos. We want your vision." My vision. For the first time in my life, someone was paying me for exactly that. I worked for 14 hours that first day, moving from the beach to the redwood forests to the rolling hills dotted with wildflowers. My camera captured moments I had dreamed of shooting: light filtering through ancient trees, fog rolling over mountains, the way golden hour transformed ordinary landscapes into something magical. That night, camping under stars brighter than any I had seen in Riverside, I uploaded the day's work to my laptop. The images took my breath away. This was the photographer I had always been inside, finally set free from the constraints of other people's expectations. Over the next 6 weeks, I traveled the length of Northern California. I photographed sunrise over Lake Tahoe, captured the ethereal beauty of Point Reyes in winter fog, spent 2 days in Yosemite waiting for the perfect light on Half Dome. Each location challenged me in new ways, pushed me to see with fresh eyes, forced me to dig deeper into my artistic vision. But it wasn't just the landscapes that made this project special. It was the people I met along the way. James had asked me to include human elements in the campaign, authentic moments that showed California as a place where people lived and loved and built meaningful lives.
In a small coastal town near Mendocino, I met Ana Martinez, an elderly woman who had been running the same bakery for 40 years. She invited me to photograph her morning routine, the way flour dust caught the early light streaming through her windows, the concentration on her face as she shaped sourdough loaves, and the joy in her eyes when she talked about feeding her community. Photography is like baking, she told me as I captured her working. Both require patience, timing, and love. You can't rush either one. Her words stayed with me as I traveled south to San Francisco, where I spent 3 days in the Mission District documenting a community garden that local residents had built in a vacant lot. The project coordinator, Marcus Thompson, was a teacher who spent his weekends helping kids plant vegetables and learn about nutrition. These kids live in food deserts, he explained as I photographed children tending tiny tomato plants. But when they grow their own food, when they see a seed become a meal, it changes how they see their own potential. I found myself thinking about potential a lot during those weeks on the road, about the seeds of talent that get planted early but need the right conditions to grow, about how some people get greenhouses and gardeners while others have to find ways to bloom in concrete. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from family members, but I had learned to ignore them. This project required complete focus, and I couldn't afford to let their drama pull me back into old patterns. I was discovering who I could be when I wasn't constantly trying to prove my worth to people who refused to see it. 3 weeks into the shoot, James called me with news that made my hands shake. Rachel, the initial images you've sent are beyond what we hoped for. The client is thrilled. So thrilled, in fact, that they want to expand the campaign, double the budget, extend the timeline, maybe even consider a follow-up project next year.
I had to pull over to the side of Highway 1 to process what he was saying. Double the budget meant $400,000 total. More money than my father made in a year running his construction company. There's something else, James continued. The California Tourism Board has been sharing some of your images on social media. They're going viral. People are calling this the most authentic representation of California they've ever seen in an advertising campaign. After the call ended, I sat in my car overlooking the ocean, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming relief and vindication. The vision that my family had dismissed as worthless was now being celebrated by thousands of strangers online. I opened Instagram and saw that my follower count had jumped from a few hundred to over 10,000 in just 1 week. The comments on my posts were filled with praise, with people asking where specific photos were taken so they could visit those places themselves. But it was the private messages that affected me most deeply. A young woman from Arizona wrote, "Your photos make me want to quit my corporate job and pursue art again." A father from Texas said, "I showed your work to my daughter, who loves photography. She needed to see that artists can make real careers from their passion." These messages reminded me why I had fallen in love with photography in the first place, not just for the act of creating, but for the way images could move people, inspire them, help them see beauty they might otherwise miss. The success of the campaign opened doors I hadn't even known existed. A gallery in San Francisco reached out about a solo exhibition. National Geographic contacted me about potential freelance work. Wedding photographers from across the state began referring high-end clients to me, knowing my artistic vision could capture their special days in ways that traditional wedding photography couldn't. But the most unexpected opportunity came from a source that caught me completely off guard. I was editing photos in a coffee shop in Santa Barbara when my phone rang with a familiar area code, Riverside. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, assuming it was another family member trying to guilt me into coming home and apologizing, but the number wasn't one I recognized. Rachel Torres? The voice was professional, slightly nervous. Yes, who's calling? This is Linda Vasquez from Torres & Associates Construction. I'm your father's new marketing coordinator. I nearly hung up, but something in her tone made me pause. He doesn't know I'm calling you, she continued quickly. But I've been following the California tourism campaign. Your work is incredible, and frankly, it's exactly what this company needs. My father's company. The business that had been struggling with its image, losing contracts to younger, more innovative competitors while Dad insisted on doing things the same way he always had. Linda, I said carefully,
I'm not sure what you're asking me. The construction industry is changing. Clients want to work with companies that understand sustainability, community impact, aesthetic design. Your father's work has always been solid, but our marketing materials look like they're from the 1990s. We're losing bids to competitors who present themselves better even when our quality is superior. She took a deep breath before continuing. I've been trying to convince him to modernize our approach for months. When I saw your tourism campaign, I realized you could transform how people see Torres and Associates. But he won't listen to me. He needs to see your success for himself before he'll admit he was wrong about your career. The irony was staggering. The daughter he'd called a disgrace, whose artistic vision he had dismissed as worthless, was now being sought after by his own struggling company. Has he seen the tourism campaign? I asked. Everyone in Riverside has seen it. Your work is all over social media. People are talking about the local girl who made it big as a photographer, but he won't admit it's you. When people mention your name, he changes the subject. I thought about this conversation for days as I continued the campaign shoots. My father's construction company was suffering because it couldn't adapt to changing times, couldn't connect with modern clients who valued creativity and vision alongside technical competence. Meanwhile, I was being celebrated for exactly those qualities he had spent decades telling me were worthless. The final week of the campaign took me back to my hometown region, shooting in the desert landscapes east of Riverside. Being so close to my childhood home stirred up complicated emotions, but I channeled them into my work. The photographs I captured that week were some of my most powerful yet. Images that spoke of resilience, of beauty found in harsh conditions, of things that flourished despite being dismissed or overlooked. On the last day of shooting, I was photographing wildflowers that had bloomed after winter rains in the desert when I noticed a familiar truck parked along the road in the distance. I zoomed in with my telephoto lens and saw my father standing beside it, talking on his phone, gesturing at a construction site visible beyond a ridge.
For a moment, I considered walking over, bridging the gap that had opened between us. But then I remembered Linda's words. He wouldn't even acknowledge my success when people mentioned it. He was still the man who had called me a disgrace in front of our entire family. Instead, I turned back to the wildflowers, tiny blooms that had pushed through rocky soil and bloomed magnificently without anyone's permission or approval. They were beautiful not because someone had deemed them worthy, but because beauty was their nature. When I submitted the final images to James Morrison 2 days later, his response was immediate and enthusiastic. The campaign would launch in 3 months, with billboards, television commercials, and a major digital presence. My photographs would be seen by millions of people across the country. "Rachel," he said during our wrap-up meeting, "this campaign is going to make your career. You're going to be one of the most sought-after photographers on the West Coast." But even more satisfying than his prediction was the realization that I had already made my career. I had chosen to bet on myself instead of seeking approval from people who refused to give it. I had turned my back on safety and security to pursue my authentic vision, and that vision was now being celebrated, purchased, and shared with the world. The girl who had been called a disgrace for pursuing photography was about to have her work displayed on billboards from Los Angeles to San Francisco. The daughter who had been dismissed for choosing art over practicality was now earning more money from her camera than most people made in traditional careers. But the most important transformation wasn't financial or professional, it was personal. I was no longer the woman who needed her family's approval to feel worthy. I was no longer afraid to be seen for who I truly was. I had walked away from their definition of success and created my own. And it was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined while hiding in their shadow. The campaign launch was still months away, but I already knew that when it happened, everyone in Riverside would see my name attached to work that was undeniably exceptional, including my father. The question was, would he finally be ready to see me? The billboard appeared on Interstate 10 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. 40 feet wide and 20 feet tall, my photograph of the Mendocino coastline stretched across the morning sky with the words, "California, find your light," in elegant white text. Underneath, in smaller print, photography by Rachel Torres. I was driving to a client meeting when I first saw it, and I had to pull over to catch my breath. Cars rushed past me on the highway while I sat in my rental car, staring at my name displayed larger than life above the desert landscape where I had grown up. This was the same stretch of road my father had driven countless times going to construction sites, the same highway where I had spent my teenage years dreaming of escape. Now my work dominated the skyline. Within hours of the billboard going live, my phone began ringing. Local news stations wanted interviews. The Riverside Press Enterprise requested a feature story. My high school photography teacher, Mrs. Henderson, called in tears, telling me she had driven out specifically to see it and taken a dozen pictures to show her current students. But the call I was waiting for never came. Linda Vasquez texted me updates throughout the day. The construction company's phones were ringing nonstop, with people asking if Roberto Torres was related to the Rachel Torres on the billboard. Potential clients were mentioning my photography when they called about construction projects, impressed that the Torres name was associated with such artistic success. "He's locked himself in his office," Linda wrote, "but I can see him through the glass wall. He keeps looking at his computer screen, and I know he's looking at your work." The campaign launched officially the following Monday. My photographs appeared in magazines, on television commercials during prime time, and across social media platforms where they were shared thousands of times. The California Tourism Board held a press conference, and James Morrison publicly credited me as the visionary behind the campaign's success. "Rachel Torres has captured the soul of California in ways that will inspire travelers for years to come," he said to a room full of reporters. "Her work reminds us that the most powerful marketing comes from authentic artistry." The validation was overwhelming, but the personal messages moved me most. A young Latina photographer from Los Angeles wrote to say my success had inspired her to quit her office job and pursue her passion full-time. A father in Sacramento sent photos of his daughter's artwork, saying she had started taking photography classes after seeing my billboards. Most surprisingly, I heard from former classmates who had always seen me as the quiet, artistic girl who didn't quite fit in. They reached out on social media to say they had always admired my creativity, that they weren't surprised by my success, that they remembered my talent even when it seemed no one else noticed. These messages revealed something I hadn't realized. I hadn't been as invisible as I thought. While my family had dismissed my art, others had been watching, remembering, believing in me even when I couldn't believe in myself. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, the construction company's financial troubles became impossible to ignore. Linda called me with desperation in her voice.
"Rachel, we lost another major contract yesterday. The client said our presentation looked outdated, that we didn't understand modern aesthetic values. Your father is furious, but he's also scared. I've never seen him like this." She paused, then continued with urgency. "The board is meeting next week. If we don't turn things around soon, he might lose control of the company he built. I know this is complicated because of your family situation, but we need you, not as his daughter, but as the photographer who's transforming how people see California." The irony was sharp and undeniable. The man who had called me a disgrace now needed exactly what he had spent years rejecting. The artistic vision he had dismissed was the only thing that could save his legacy. I told Linda I would consider it, but I needed time to think. That evening, I drove to the desert location where I had photographed those wildflowers months earlier. The blooms were long gone now, but the landscape held a different kind of beauty. Stark, honest, uncompromising. As I stood there with my camera, capturing the last light of day, I realized something profound. This wasn't about revenge or proving my father wrong. This was about choosing who I wanted to be in the face of an opportunity to help. I called Linda the next morning. "Set up a meeting," I said, "but not at the office, neutral ground, and make it clear that this is a business consultation, not a family reconciliation." The meeting took place at a conference room in a downtown Riverside hotel. I arrived 10 minutes early, setting up my laptop and spreading out portfolio samples on the polished wooden table. When the door opened, my father walked in, followed by Linda and 2 other executives I didn't recognize. He looked older than I remembered. The confidence that had always defined him seemed diminished.
his shoulders carrying a weight that hadn't been there a year ago. His eyes met mine briefly, then darted away. "Mr. Torres," I said formally, extending my hand for a professional handshake. "Thank you for meeting with me." He took my hand, his grip firm but uncertain. "Rachel." We sat across from each other at the conference table, the same distance that had separated us at countless family dinners, but now the dynamic was completely reversed. I was the expert they needed. I was the one with solutions. I opened my laptop and began the presentation I had prepared. For 45 minutes, I showed them how visual storytelling could transform their company's image. I displayed before and after examples from other businesses I had rebranded, demonstrated how modern marketing could honor tradition while embracing innovation. Construction is about building things that last, but people don't just buy buildings, they buy dreams of what their lives could become in those spaces. My job would be to help you sell those dreams. The executives asked questions about timelines and budgets. Linda took detailed notes. My father sat silent, listening, his expression unreadable. When I finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then one of the executives cleared his throat. "Ms. Torres, your proposal is exactly what we need. The question is whether you're interested in taking on this project, given the personal dynamics involved." I looked directly at my father for the first time since I had begun speaking. "This isn't personal," I said. "This is business. If Torres and Associates wants to hire my services, we'll have a professional relationship based on my expertise and your company's needs. Nothing more, nothing less." My father's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "What would we need from you?" For the next hour, we discussed contracts and creative control and project timelines. I made it clear that I would have complete artistic authority, that their success would depend on trusting my vision. It was a harder negotiation than any I had ever conducted, but by the end of the meeting, we had an agreement. As everyone gathered their materials to leave, my father lingered behind. "Rachel," he said when we were alone, "I need to say something." I closed my laptop and looked at him, waiting. "I've been watching your work. The billboards, the articles, everything." His voice was strained, each word seeming to cost him something. "You were right about your talent, about your career, about everything. I was wrong." The words I had waited my entire life to hear hung in the air between us. "And I'm sorry. Not just for Thanksgiving, but for all of it. For not seeing you, for not believing in you, for calling you." He couldn't repeat the word disgrace. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "I appreciate that, Dad, I do, but I don't need your apology to know my worth anymore." His eyes widened slightly as if he hadn't expected that response. "I spent 29 years trying to earn your approval, but somewhere along the way, I learned to approve of myself. Your opinion doesn't define me anymore. My work does." We stood there, in the hotel conference room, two people who shared DNA and history and wounds that ran deeper than either of us wanted to acknowledge. But we also, for the first time, saw each other clearly. "I hope we can work together professionally," I said, gathering my materials. "But our personal relationship will take time to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all." He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. "I'll earn it back," he said quietly, "however long it takes."
3 months later, the rebranding campaign for Torres & Associates launched. My photographs transformed their image completely, showing not just buildings, but the lives that happened inside them, the communities that grew around them, the dreams that took shape within their walls. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Contract bids increased by 60% in the first quarter. Industry publications featured the company as an example of successful modernization. My father was invited to speak at construction conferences about adapting to changing markets. But more than the business success, what mattered to me was the recognition. Not from my family, but from the broader world that could now see what I had always been capable of creating. The Thanksgiving invitation came with a handwritten note from my mother. "Please come home," she wrote. "We miss you. We want to celebrate your success." I almost didn't go. The memory of last year's humiliation was still fresh, the wound still tender.
But Mrs. Henderson's words from months earlier echoed in my mind. This isn't about whether you might fail. This is about whether you're brave enough to succeed. I had succeeded professionally. Now I needed to be brave enough to succeed personally. I walked into my parents' house carrying a portfolio case and wearing the confidence I had earned over the past year. The dining room looked the same, but everything else had changed. My photographs from the tourism campaign were displayed on the mantle. Articles about my work were spread across the side table. For the first time in my life, my achievements were visible in my childhood home. When my father stood to give his traditional toast, the room fell silent. But this time, the silence felt different, anticipatory rather than tense. This year, he said, his voice steady but emotional, I want to talk about courage, about the courage it takes to follow your own path when everyone around you is pointing in a different direction. His eyes found mine across the table. My daughter, Rachel, showed me what that kind of courage looks like. She pursued her art when we told her it was impractical. She built a career when we said it was impossible. She proved us wrong about everything we thought we knew about success. He paused, his voice catching slightly. Rachel is not a disgrace to this family. She is the pride of this family, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was right in front of me all along. The room erupted in applause. My relatives, the same people who had watched my public humiliation a year ago, were now celebrating my vindication. But their approval felt different than I had imagined it would. Welcome, but not necessary. Pleasant, but not essential. I raised my own glass and looked around the table at faces that had shaped my childhood, influenced my dreams, and nearly crushed my spirit. Thank you, I said simply. But the most important thing I learned this year is that I don't need anyone's permission to be who I am, not even yours. The silence that followed was profound. But it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was the silence of understanding, of acceptance, of a family finally seeing one of their own clearly. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, my mother pulled me aside. "Are you happy?" she asked, her eyes searching my face. I thought about the question seriously, about my apartment filled with my own photographs, about clients who valued my vision, about a career built on authenticity rather than compromise. Yes, I said, and meant it completely. I'm happy. As I drove home that night through the streets of Riverside, past the billboard that still displayed my work in lights, I realized that the girl who had walked out of Thanksgiving dinner in shame had been transformed into a woman who walked back in with dignity intact. The disgrace had become the pride, but more importantly, the daughter who had needed their approval had become the woman who didn't. That transformation, I understood now, had been worth everything. Have you ever been told you'd never amount to anything, only to prove them spectacularly wrong? Share your story in the comments, and if you believe that your worth isn't determined by other people's expectations, hit like and subscribe for more stories about people who refused to accept the limits others placed on them. Next up, 2 more stories chosen just for you. If you enjoyed this, you'll want to see what's coming. Tap to keep going.